Some new polling is shedding light on how Canadians feel about a vaccine for COVID-19. The numbers suggest people may be growing skeptical of how safe it might be. Leger surveyed more than 1,500 people. 39% of respondents said the vaccine should be mandatory. What's notable is that is down 18 percentage points from a similar poll conducted back in July. A majority of respondents said a vaccine should be voluntary, up 11 points from July. Among those who would get the vaccine as soon as it became available, 63%. Still high, but 7 points lower than in July. 17% of respondents said they wouldn't, which is up 3 points. For reaction to some of these shifting attitudes, I'm joined now by Dr. Jeff Kwong. He's the interim director of the Centre for Vaccine Preventable Diseases at the University of Toronto. Hi, Dr. Kwong. Great to see you as always.
Thanks for having me.
I wanted to start off with kind of the headline out of this one, which is the 39% of respondents who say getting a vaccine should be mandatory, which is a decline of 18 points from a similar survey by the same company back in July. Is that notable to you?
Well, I mean, definitely it's a shift, but I don't think it's an unreasonable shift. I mean, I think, making a vaccine mandatory, there's a pretty high bar that it has to meet. And there's just so many uncertainties right now. I mean, we don't know if these vaccines are safe. We don't know how effective they are. So I think right now with all the uncertainty, it is reasonable to say that, maybe, we shouldn't yet make it a mandatory vaccine. And we'll have to see how things go in the coming months, when we have more evidence and more data on these vaccines.
Can you envision any sort of scenario where this vaccine, or ultimately any vaccine that proves to be approved or proves to be successful, would be mandatory, or do you anticipate that it will be voluntary no matter what?
Well, I mean, I think it depends on a lot of things. I mean, first of all, you have to look at the bug, right? So, certain vaccines are mandatory for kids to attend school, and that's where we have good evidence that these illnesses can cause, like these pathogens can cause very serious illness. So an example might be measles, where, it's not only can cause very serious illness, but also very highly contagious. And so we know that COVID is contagious, not as contagious as measles, and it can make people very sick as well. But let's say there is a mutation in the future where it became even more deadly or virulent, then that might shift the pendulum towards, making it a mandatory vaccine. And then you have to look at the vaccine factors. Is the vaccine safe? Is it effective? Does getting it, like the benefits of getting it outweigh the potential harms of getting it? Because we're talking about, people getting something, like people who are healthy getting something, that, we're kind of imposing it upon them. So we have to make sure that the benefits outweigh the harms, not only for the individual, but also for society on the whole. So there's lots of considerations that need to be taken into account.
How much do you think people will know by the time one is available? And I ask that only because I think in the past, this process has been years and years and years long. Like the fact that we're talking about the potential for a vaccine in the spring of next year would have been unheard of a decade ago. I think there is some concern about how much the public will know. How much will we know about the side effects? What can you tell us about that? Does the regulatory process, for example, dictate that we will know a lot?
Yeah. So right now there's phase 3 trials going on for a few of the vaccines. And so these are studies done in large numbers of people. We're talking about tens of thousands of people. And so let's say they take, let's say there's like 30,000 people who get the vaccine and then 30,000 who get a placebo. And so, we'll be able to see, side effects that are occurring in, maybe, 1 in 1,000, like maybe 1 in 10,000, but probably not. So the rarer side effects are things that we won't have a good sense about. We will know how effective it is in preventing the infection. So that's helpful. Like right now, the trials that have been done have just showed that they generate a good antibody response, which is helpful to know. But does it actually prevent the illness is what we need the phase 3 trials to show us. And so, we need the phase 3 trials before approval. So that at least we'll have that information. And then once it is released to the population, there will be lots of studies looking at, once it's, been, received by millions of people, how safe are these vaccines? What side effects are they causing? So there is a little bit of, there's going to be very close monitoring of this. of these vaccines when they are released to the general public. But for now, I mean, I think at the time that the vaccines are released, they'll at least have had all the phase 3 trials in order to get approval for, use in the general public.
So this is a political show, and I'm always interested in what the implications of this type of discussion are for government, especially because they're the ones that are making the deals for these, and in fact, we'll have to roll them out. When you look at some of that survey and what it shows us about some of the hesitancy Canadians might be feeling at this juncture, what do you think the implications are for government in their anticipated rollout of a vaccine, potential vaccine?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not too worried about these numbers, to be honest. I mean, I think the bigger worry is how we're going to roll this out.
Right.
How many doses we're going to get, how quickly, and how many people are we going to be able to vaccinate in a timely manner. And who are we going to vaccinate, the priority groups that we're going to identify and how we're going to get to them. So those are the things that I'm more worried about, actually, than some people saying that they might have concerns and they might not want to get it. I think there's going to be lots of people who want to get it who may not be able to get it because of just supply issues, at least during the initial period, just because it's going to take a while for there to be enough supply for all the people who do want to get it.
And how soon do you think governments have to try and figure that stuff out and sort of make it public? Because I think there are even basic questions around whether or not it'll be free, for example.
Oh, yeah. Well, definitely, the government is going to invest to make it free for, their populations. I think that what's going on right now is like discussions about who are the priority groups going to be.
Right.
So that's where we have to look at, who's the most vulnerable. Are we going to go after the people who are most vulnerable? Are we going to go after the people who are most likely to transmit the disease? And so there's all these things that are happening right now. Discussions happening, decisions being made. And then there's a lot of factors that we don't know yet, like, which vaccine is it going to be? How many doses are going to be needed? What are the storage requirements? Can it just be stored in fridges, or does it need to be stored in freezers? So there's all these considerations, then who's going to be giving the vaccines? Is it going to be through public health? Is it going to be through physicians, like doctors' offices? Is it going to be through pharmacies? So there's all these sorts of considerations that need to be sorted out in the coming months.
That is a long list of considerations. It'll keep everyone busy for a while. Thanks, Dr. Kwong. Appreciate your time as always.
Okay, you're very welcome. Bye now.
I'm here with the Power Panel to talk about the implications for the government. Tim, Kathleen, Amanda, and Sherelle. Amanda, I'll start with you. This is sort of, I think, going to become a huge topic over the next number of months as we get closer and closer to a vaccine actually being secured and go through all the ethical questions of how it gets dispersed and who gets it first and all those kinds of things. What did you make of some of these shifts in people's attitudes and Canadians' attitudes over the summer?
Well, I'm in PR and we love our surveys. So I can tell you the problem with surveys, though, is that they obviously just reflect a particular period of time, like a snapshot in time. And part of the problem with that is that it tends to reflect what the news of the day is or the news of the time is as well. So what are we in? We're in a time when a lot of pharmaceuticals are in their phase 3 clinical trials. Some of them are revealing that they're having some adverse effects and they're having to pause those trials. And all of that type of news definitely reflects in the public sentiment towards something like a vaccine. But mark my words, everybody knows this, when a vaccine does become available, the thing that will accompany it will be a big public education campaign, which will talk about things like safety and efficacy. And the purpose of that is to get people feeling okay and safe and good about the idea of going out to get a vaccine. So we will likely see a lot of ebbs and flows in public sentiment as we work our way up to that final date. And a lot of that will be influenced both by the news of the day and how well the federal government and the manufacturers of these vaccines talk to the public about what they can expect.
Yeah, I can really, Sherelle, not envision the federal government. I don't even know if they would be able to making it mandatory. I think there would be some jurisdiction for provinces there. I still can't even picture that happening necessarily. But Amanda's right. Instead, there'll have to be an immense public education campaign mounted on all fronts to essentially encourage people to use it. There might be also some hesitation, like Amanda says, just because of what we're watching with the breaks in some of the clinical trials, and also just, I think, a little bit of worry among people around, is this quote unquote rushed, and might there be, something untested that I'm then putting into my body? I think that's where the public education stuff comes into play for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you could put me in that category of people who'd say, oh, well, a vaccine's coming out. Maybe I'll wait and see if my neighbor drops dead before I take it. But I don't know. Maybe that's the wrong thing to say. But
I hope your neighbor isn't your friend. Yeah.
I'm not her neighbor. I feel I've been the target tonight.
Oh.
But obviously, I mean, it's been a push from the federal government this whole time in terms of messaging and getting things out and building trust among the public that what they're saying is in the public's best interest, and what they're recommending and what they're ordering or what they're legislating is in the public's best interest. So I doubt we're going to see, like you said, a vaccine be made mandatory. But we will absolutely continue to see these ebbs and flows of people, not wanting to jump right on it just because the news around a vaccine can get really convoluted. And for the most part, for most vaccines, most of the scientific research that goes on, people aren't paying as close attention as they are to the news as about COVID-19. So, with every, trial that gets halted, it becomes a big deal, even though it's a natural course of the scientific process. So as we've seen with, mask mandates and all kinds of things, people are going to push back. People are going to be wary, especially when it's coming from government. And that's just part of, the government's job to make sure that people are properly informed as to the risks and hopefully the benefits.
So Kathleen, if you're in government, you're part of the team in charge of a vaccine rollout, and you see this survey, granted it does only reflect a period in time, but what do you take from it?
Well, none of my colleagues have mentioned Trump, which I also think has influenced people's viewpoints. I think that, while the news cycle, for sure, the vaccine trials and some of the stumbles perhaps that they have had, or the halting, for sure, that's impacted people. But really, I think we have to weigh into just the impact that he has had and in terms of his reaction and drive for a vaccine in the United States on what people are thinking and whether it's safe or not. So I think that has factored into it. That said, listen, I said last week on the show, and it still baffles me. Honestly, it baffles me why the Liberal government hasn't answered this question. We know that they should answer whether it's going to be delivered free to Canadians. It's such a simple, they've gone out, they've done the work to secure these vaccines. They should commit, like Horgan did in BC, Premier Horgan did in BC, that every Canadian will have access to a vaccine for free if they want to take it. That, as we know from the polling data, actually increases people's willingness to even take, not having that financial barrier, knowing that there's free access. So that's one easy point. But what we know from whether it's from door knocking and getting out the vote in elections campaigns or from public health campaigns, we know that the best way to encourage people to participate, to whether get to the ballot box or actually wear a mask, for instance, or wash their hands, is to ask them and say that we need their help, right? To participate together, to invite them to help the wider community. So the government needs to start that persuasion campaign. And one way to do that, I would argue, is start by saying, this is going to be free. If you take it, we can restart our economy. Until we have this vaccine, we're going to keep on having these stops and starts. So join us, work with us to get this vaccine. And of course, there's going to be triaging anyhow in terms of age and demographic about who gets it first, regardless. Obviously, it makes sense that it goes to the elderly population and most vulnerable first. But I think that's the first step that the government has to do.
And the timing of this, it's not like we're talking necessarily about something, Tim, 10 years down the road or 5 years, right? Every doctor we've had on the show, and we're going to interview one a bit later, says those clinical trials could be done by the end of the year, and it could be off for approval to Health Canada, and maybe available by the springtime. I mean, there's a lot of ifs in that, but that means that it's something the government has to be considering now.
Yeah, look, I don't think any government's going to make it mandatory. I don't think they can't. I know schools in Ontario require children to provide a vaccine menu of the vaccines that they have. But I think I agree with my colleagues. Moral suasion is going to be the answer here. But there's been, look, the most news we've gotten about vaccines, as Kathleen alluded to, one has been about Trump. Remember, hydrochloroquine was going to be the great solution. And of course, it was idiotic. And then don't forget the first vaccine, Sputnik, the Russians, Mr. Putin. So Trump are leading the charge in vaccines. It's no wonder Yeah, but it's no wonder Canadians don't have a lot of confidence. And then the story this week, the Johnson & Johnson doing what they're supposed to do, stop a clinical trial when a review group has said it. There's just so much confusion. That's what you're seeing in those polls. I think when there is a vaccine or vaccines that are deemed to be effective, you will see Canadians take them in very high numbers.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.